on your suggestion to fill the entire thing full of sheep.
Full of what?
Patrick suggested to fill it full of farm animals, like an old dairy barn, which remains warm because of the livestock. But
welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by GBA Senior Editor Kylie Jacques.
Hello.
Operations Manager for TDS Custom Construction Ian Schwant.
hello.
And our producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, I feel like I've just seen you guys. How are you?
Yeah, I thought you were going to introduce Jeff as crucial part of the program, producer Jeff.
So you all probably don't know what we're talking about, but we tried to record earlier today when we were in the middle of a pretty severe rainstorm, and Jeff suddenly disappeared from the screen, and none of us know how to run the show, so we had to decide to do it again.
The unsung hero.
It's true. So you lost your internet, Jeff, we were saying.
Right, yep.
And I think
what
folks
happened.
would expect that suburban Connecticut is pretty reliable for electricity and internet, but that hasn't been my experience. How about you?
Nope.
No, they'd be wrong if they thought that.
They were just dead wrong.
Kylie, what have you been doing? It's been a long time.
I know it has been a minute. Let's see. I recently replaced the flex drain under my kitchen sink. There's some strange situations going on down there. I was convinced I had it all figured out, got the right part. I did rely on my neighbor a little bit because I didn't have the right tool to fully tighten it. You know, you got to have tools. You can't just hand tighten those things. So, but I got it all situated. He just needs to come over and tighten it up for me. And it was dry for maybe 5 days, and now there's water. So I'm dealing with a bunch of water leaks. How about you guys?
Well, I want to offer a little tip here first. Run really hot water through the trap, or for a few minutes, even 10, and then tighten those nuts. And I think there's a better chance that they'll tighten up.
Well, the water's not coming from those nuts. That whole bit that we did, that's all dry. It's coming from behind. I think I need to replace the faucet because there's a leak when I turn that on. And so it's coming from behind, it's dripping down from the faucet behind the under cabinet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
it's the faucet itself. It's not that it's leaking around from water splashing up there.
Right. That's my guess. That's what it looks like. But I felt like I felt very accomplished when I replaced that thing. It wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy. No, plumbing I think is the worst. It's
getting those things to sit just right and fit just right. But I did learn a couple of things. So that's a good. It's good to do those things.
Totally. Did you go to the internet like the rest of us to learn how to replace this trap?
No, I took the thing apart, went to True Value, got what I needed, figured it out. Just by the looks of it. It's not a very complicated fix. It's just getting it right.
Get any help at the hardware store to get the right stuff? Uh-oh.
No. I relied on my own resources.
Well, sometimes that's better because you don't always get the best advice, honestly.
Right.
Yeah. Ian,
The best advice I ever got for getting plumbing stuff from the hardware store when we lived in Millbrook was a small hometown hardware store that had been there forever, and the owner just said, buy like double what you think you're going to need, just return
That's a good
it.
idea.
Just buy way more than you think. If you think it's 1.5 inch, buy every 1.5 inch fitting, and then buy every inch or whatever other drain fitting it might be.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse than getting home and trying to do
plumbing.
the thing and then having it the wrong part, right?
I'm going to segue into my plumbing.
On a Sunday or something like that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I'm going to segue into my own plumbing story because the timing is impeccable here. But I replaced the well tank on my well system 10 years after when I should have done it. It was a very small tank. I think it had 20 gallons of capacity, so now it has 36.
That That is
Went
really
pretty
small.
smooth. Yeah, really small, Kylie. I think they were cheaping out, right? This was a flip house, and you don't get any points for having a bigger well tank. So, like you got Ian, I went to the home center and bought like tons of stuff, right? Just because you don't want to have to quit in the middle of it and go out again. So I totally agree.
You
I
don't
was
want
really
to have
worried.
to go back after you were just there.
Especially if you're bleeding, which I was.
From the plumbing project, Kylie?
Yes. Yes. I'm not the most patient of people.
I had a couple scratches that had me bleeding too. I was really worried about getting the T-tank out of the bottom of the well tank. So I went to my neighbor was coincidentally having a yard sale. He's been a contractor, it looks like, for a few decades, and he's trying to pare down to relocate. And I bought an 18-inch pipe wrench from him, and that seemed like a smart move because it made getting out the 1-inch tank T a lot easier because that thing's in there pretty good.
Patrick, when you removed your old tank, did you hammer holes in it in order to drain it?
Oh, no. I just cut the pipes on both sides of the pressure switch tank T assembly and let the water run out. And then I unscrewed that from the tank as one assembly and then screwed it right into the new one to save a bunch of threaded fittings that may or may not leak when you put it all back together. So I knew this one was good, so I didn't want to mess with it.
When I had mine replaced, that's what the guy did.
I don't think that's standard procedure.
It was strange to me, too.
Ian, what have you been doing?
We spent the whole long holiday weekend landscaping outside. We had a dump truck come last week with 21
that's a
yards
lot.
of mulch on it. We got
I
about
do 4, and
2/3
I
of
know
the
how
way
long
through
that
the
takes. So
pile.
21, that's a lot. Do you have a front end loader or something?
Yeah, my dad came over with the loader tractor and helped us, and then we used the tiller on our small garden tractor to prep all the areas. And then I built a greenhouse from a greenhouse kit that I got from a big box store. It's been on Sarah's wish list for a really long time.
So I think I told you all about our little greenhouse experiment. One of Carol's colleagues tried a 6x8 greenhouse, very similar to yours, Ian, same construction methods. And I got to say, it was one of the most challenging things to put together I have ever put together. And the folks that we got it from had actually given up on putting it together. And you said that some folks had mixed reviews on social media about the quality and assembly process.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all of the reviews that started out with like a caveat of I'm a professional carpenter or I'm a builder, and this was horrible. There was one person that actually said it took them over a month to
What's
put
so
it together.
complicated about it? It looks fairly straightforward just from the photos you shared.
It is fairly straightforward, but what I found really important in the way I approached it was I separated all the parts out into like for like piles because a lot of the parts look deceptively similar. So as you start, if you start by grabbing the wrong part, there's nothing to let you know that you've started with the wrong part until it's way too late. It is challenging to get all of the polycarbonate panels to slide into the grooves on the frame as well. But I got most of it up. I would say I'm 75% done, and I had a good solid 10-hour day and one trip to the hardware
Was
store.
that pressure treated timber base or foundation that you laid part of they come with the kit?
No, I put that in the day before. So I had about a good full day in with digging out a spot for it, leveling the ground, compacting it. We put foam board down, put gravel down. The greenhouse wasn't supposed to be here for another week, so I thought I was going to get the rest of the long weekend to myself after doing that, but it showed up on Friday, so
You didn't hide it from Sarah?
She was the one who received it. I was gone. I was gone and just got a text. The greenhouse is here! Exclamation points.
That's
That's
funny.
fun stuff.
How about you, Jeff? Have you been working on your place, getting ready for winter?
A little bit, not too much. Just, a little bit of car maintenance stuff and cleaning stuff, but nothing too major.
Well, as always, we heard from our great listeners. Mark weighed in on our discussion of using reclaimed, reused, repurposed, tongue and groove hardwood flooring. And he said, just listening to the current pod and the letter about salvaged flooring struck a chord. The best random find at a vintage store was this Stanley plane. It was crucial for getting a tight fit. The other tool they will find useful is an old chisel for cleaning the top side of the tongue. All the boards I used required at least a little scraping to get dirt and or stain/sealer off where there was space between the boards and the original installation. So Mark sent a picture of I think it's called a rabbiting plane, right, Ian?
Or a shoulder plane. I think Stanley had a couple of different names for it, but the interesting thing about that plane is you can actually take the front bed off of it, and then it becomes like a chisel plane for cleaning up glue. So that one that he found is a pretty versatile tool.
So I want to give a little plug to, sometimes when I look for content for GBA, I will rely on things that people are searching for. And one of the things that people are searching for, it turns out, is you really reusing salvaged materials. So I asked Martin Holliday if he would write an article about that topic, and he did. It's coming up at the end of September. And that material that you're talking about that he's removing, he refers to as congealed black floor sludge. But his bottom line, and he has some experience with it, and he did a great job with the article, is that he calls it a reality check. Although recycling is, he says, beloved by green builders, it rarely makes economic sense. And, he makes some good points about when and where it does make sense. Yeah, lots to think about there.
I totally agree with Martin that it doesn't make financial sense. But I tell you what, my favorite part of our house is the existing hardwood flooring in it. And, it was covered with carpet by our builder, and I had to scrape that asphalt sludge off of it with a scraper. It took hours, but I love it. It's beautiful, and you can't buy it. I think that's the coolest part.
I think the point was essentially like it's good for certain things, and he referred to like backwoods Vermont homes where building codes are not an issue, and but also just like accents, in the house. But building a significant structure out of salvaged materials is not very practical.
Jeff, you seem to be familiar with this plane. What do you call it?
It's a shoulder plane.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have one?
I do not. Yeah.
I don't either. I can't see why I would need that until today.
I have the one that he sent us the picture of, and then I have a nicer Lee Nielsen one that's much larger.
What do you do with this?
Just cleaning up rabbits and dados and tongue and grooves, things like that, making things fit.
Cool. I guess I have
or tenons, rather.
Yeah.
I guess I need one. That's been the thing that's been lacking from my woodcraft for decades, clearly.
I'm sure Matt Kenny has a couple. He could loan you one so you can get the feel for it.
I can sharpen it with a belt sander.
Do you have to sharpen it often on a project like that?
This comes from Keith. Hey, FHB podcast posse. I'm writing to offer some help for Hans, who in episode 487 was looking for advice on heating and cooling his detached workshop. Regarding minisplits in Climate Zone 6, using equipment listed in the NEEP Cold Climate Air Source Heat Pump product list should provide performance to meet Hans's needs. Most units produce 100% of their rated capacity down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and a good portion, about 82% of their rated capacity, and temperatures down to minus 13. With a shop that doesn't need to be maintained 72 degrees 24/7, this equipment will serve well to heat, cool, and dehumidify. The concern about dust was well covered in the podcast and should be actively managed. To learn from someone who's been there, check out Jay Bates, a woodworker from Mississippi, who has built and tested air filtration assemblies to protect his shop's mini split head units. His approach is sound. Links below. Keep up the good work. Keith, that's fantastic. And I'll put the links that Keith sent us to both Jay Bates's mini split research and the list of cold climate heat pumps. What a great resource.
What did you think of that filter assembly that he had made?
I think it's awesome.
Quite the surface area on that. Is that
I
like
mean,
4
it has to
furnace
work,
filters?
right? Yeah, I think it's fantastic.
I love when people write in along these lines where they've listened to a previous episode and they offer some expert advice for somebody else who wrote in. I love that.
And they're way smarter than us. Hi, FHB podcast. Crested Butte, our ski resort neighbor to the north, is really making some waves here in Colorado. They've decided to go all electric for now, all new builds going forward. We're in climate zone 3A/4B. As a builder here, I'm perplexed. Taking away less options to heat homes is really confusing. Also, as a builder who always tries to build green in such a cold climate, it's sort of mind-pretzeling why the town would pass such restrictions while wood-burning fireplaces are still allowed. Have you seen any such actions in the Northeast? Thoughts? Even a local inspector, it's a small area, so I wouldn't like to blow his cover, says it might be the dumbest thing he's seen in 40 years as our infrastructure and load are not adequate for our ski season rush. We're very isolated. Always enjoy the show and try every week to implement things I learn. Thank you. Joseph, Gunnison County, Colorado. Kylie, have you heard of this kind of thing? Isn't
I
Massachusetts?
have. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say at the city level, but I imagine it won't be too long before it trickles down to the residential sector. I found, I guess the governor in March of 2021 passed a climate and emissions reduction law. And in that, there's something called the Spark Act, which essentially requires the update of state buildings all new construction and renovation in Massachusetts will require.
Do you know of any other states that are
I don't.
going that?
I know.
Yeah.
I'm just familiar with Massachusetts because I know it was a big thing in Boston that came up recently. Anyway.
What do you all think about this? I'm a little confused too.
I think without the necessary infrastructure
was part of
updates, you have to be pretty concerned about it as a good
that was built
strategy,
into this. Yeah.
especially if it's just enacted without any thought to that. They may be putting additional pressure on an infrastructure that can't handle it, much like the internet grid in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So we heard from a couple folks on our discussion of protecting a foundation through the winter that might not be built upon for perhaps 3 years, right, was the time frame we were talking about. First, we'll hear from our friend Mike Girton. Hi, Patrick. Following up on your discussion of installing a foundation and leaving it exposed for long periods of time, Ian is correct. If the footing of any type of foundation is unprotected from below freezing temperatures over a period of time, frost may form in the soil beneath the footing, and it can be heaved up. It doesn't matter if the foundation is poured concrete, ICF, permanent wood, or shallow frost protected. In most cases, the building on top of the foundation helps insulate the footing so the warmth of the earth doesn't escape into the cold atmosphere in winter. Even though there's a risk of frost heaving and unprotected footing, it doesn't mean a footing and foundation left exposed for a year or more will experience damage from frost. For frost heaving to occur, there needs to be 3 things: frost-susceptible soil beneath the footing, water in the frost-susceptible soil, and below freezing temperatures for a long enough duration for the water in the soil beneath the footing to freeze. I've seen foundations installed around 2008 or 9 that weren't built on for 6 or 7 years due to the Great Recession. There was no evidence of frost heaving or foundation damage. The native soil beneath the footings was well-drained gravel, and most winters did not have a long enough duration deep freeze. And the one very cold winter coincided with a deep snow, which may have helped insulate the worst of the cold from the Earth's heat. Ideally, as you and Ian suggest, the foundation should be capped with a floor deck. This will help, especially if any windows or other holes to the exterior of the foundation are blocked. Not only will the floor deck help keep the basement tempered from the cold, the joist will help resist the other problem with leaving a foundation exposed without a heated building on top: lateral frost pressure. If the backfill soil isn't well drained and it becomes wet and freezes, it will expand in all directions, putting pressure on the sides of the foundation. This can begin to bow a wall inward and crack it. I should add that the floor deck should actually be installed before backfilling the foundation to begin with. There's always a risk when earth is placed against an unbraced foundation wall that it will move and crack. The floor deck is probably the best way to brace the foundation. Good point. So if you don't have wet soil under the footing, you probably are not going to get heaving. And all these things are a means to prevent wet soil from accumulating under there and creating problems. Did we learn anything, Ian?
I'm surprised that Mike didn't comment on your suggestion to fill the entire thing full of sheep.
Full of what?
Patrick suggested to fill it full of farm animals like an old dairy barn, which remains warm because of the livestock living in
That's
it.
different.
Are you familiar with using livestock to condition unconditioned buildings, Kylie?
No, but makes a certain amount of sense, I guess.
So we also heard from Matthew. Forgive me if I say your name wrong, Matthew. Punton, who's an engineer with SK Design Group. He writes, hello, FHB podcast. I finally have a good reason to write in. I'm a professional civil engineer in rural Western Massachusetts, Zone 5. Feel free to share my contact information with the listener in episode 489, which had a question about pouring a foundation and letting it sit over the winter. I believe it can be done, but needs to be protected from frost at the footing and slab level. So he goes on to say the same things that Mike does. He goes and provides a formula here. He says, I recommend installing 12 inches of crushed stone, not gravel, under the footing with a perforated drain at the bottom discharging to daylight. The crushed stone will extend beyond the footing on the sides of the footing, partway up the foundation wall and under the slab. It's important to get good drainage on the exterior of the foundation wall too, as frost could push the walls inward if there's no first floor deck in place. I must clarify that gravel is a combination of different size aggregate and soil particles that can be compacted and used as a road or driveway based. Crushed stone is more uniform aggregate that has many voids and provides better drainage. For protection, I've seen the option of laying down a thick blanket of hay, as you mentioned. I've also seen insulated blankets, such as they use when pouring concrete to keep the heat in. You lay it over the footings in the winter. But typically, only a foundation contractor has these, and I don't expect a homeowner to buy them for a one-time project. I also think some form of protection could be done with XPS rigid insulation on the exterior of the basement, laid both horizontal and vertical at the footing level. This XPS could then be used later in the construction process, or a layer of insulation can be put down before the slab is poured. I'd also like to touch briefly on the permit in the riverfront area granted by the state. Those permits are typically valid for 3 years, as the listener mentioned, but they can also be extended another 3 years prior to expiration. It's a relatively simple process. Also, with the state of emergency in Massachusetts due to COVID, many permits got an automatic extension of about 15 months, which is the length of the state of emergency. Again, feel free to share my contact information with your listener. Keep up the great work as always. Thank you. Matthew, thank you. Matthew Punton, PE, Senior Engineer, SK Design Group. Oh my God, these folks have another 3 years to build their house. They can stretch it out over 6+ years, right?
Gotta love Massachusetts.
What do you think about using the XPS that you're later going to insulate the foundation with to insulate the footing? I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. I thought the same thing. Where would you use it, though, later?
I think on the foundation walls.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't backfill the foundation and you have good draining, you're not going to have water build up there. So I think you just need it to keep the heat in the footing, right?
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting that all of this footing talk and there's no discussion around capillary breaks.
That's a good point. So
But that's not, I guess that's not at issue here, but.
if you want to learn
That's
about
something you always wanna
capillary breaks
provide, yeah?
and foundation footings, though, go to Green Building Advisor, and we'll actually put a link to that very good
Ben
article
Bogey has
on the
a good
subject.
detail for
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Whose
he uses
piece is that,
waterproofing.
Kylie?
Ben Bogey, he uses waterproofing flashing actually on his foundation for capillary break.
Yeah, I used the same material that I used for the exterior side of my foundation wall as the capillary break
Yeah, that's what he does.
in my house. Much the same as what Ben describes in that
Okay.
piece.
What's the difference?
What's the difference
What you-
between the
No, what you
waterproofing
do and what
membrane
Ben
and what
does.
he?
It struck me.
I think it's pretty much the same exact thing. I just used the exterior waterproofing membrane, which was not a self-adhered product. It had its own special glue that I had to roll on everything, but it worked great as a capillary break.
Did you key your foundation footing to accept your foundation walls, or were they flat?
They were flat, but the rebar did extend out of the footing.
Can you
You
explain
just
to me
poke
why
it
you
through
do that?
the membrane, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Why does your rebar
Yep,
oh,
just poked the membrane over it and taped it in. So that's what keys the wall to the footing, as opposed to doing a keyway, which can be a little bit difficult depending on your forming system for your footings.
Ben had told me that the keyways were sort of a northeast.
Yeah, I don't think people do that very
Too
much
much,
anymore. I think it's really labor intensive, and getting like
Yeah.
wood that's been in concrete with wet concrete out is never easy in my experience. This is from Rob, who has a question about his Victorian. Hi, I recently purchased a 140-year-old Victorian home in southern Ontario, climate zone 5. Electrical, plumbing, and heating have all been updated. It has a gas-fired boiler, but windows and insulation have not. The house has a double brick exterior, a shingled roof. The shingles are 5 years old and in good repair, and a rubble foundation. I have 3 insulation-related questions. 1, I intend to finish the 1,500 square foot attic, which is currently unfinished and uninsulated. The rafters are a true 6 inches deep. I understand that applying closed cell spray foam directly to the underside of the roof cladding between the rafters and making the roof an unvented assembly is likely the best way to achieve the highest R value. However, I am concerned that the roof sheathing, OSB on top of the original roof planks, will rot in such an assembly because it will not be able to dry to the interior of the attic. On the other hand, because the rafters are only 6 inches deep, using any type of vented assembly would seem to require adding substantial depth to the rafters to achieve a meaningful R value, especially if bats or fiberglass or mineral wool are used. What would you do if this were your attic? This is like a game show. I love it. Okay. Jeff, what would you do if this were your attic?
This is in Ontario, and I gotta believe that code is gonna be outrageous for how much R value you need to get into that roof assembly. And
But I think they're pretty forgiving with existing conditions. So
Yeah.
anything you're doing is better than what is there, which is butt kiss.
I think have to go with spray foam.
Like flash and bat, right?
No, like solid closed cell spray foam, I
Oh.
think is what Jeff's saying, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
How about you, Kylie? If this were your attic, what would you do?
I mean, is there any argument for flash and bat? I mean, if we can reduce the amount of spray foam, that would be a good thing. So flash and bat seems, is that
well,
an-
you're not going to get any meaningful bat because the rafters are so
shallow.
shallow. Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to replace the rafters. I know that some high performance builders really like I-joists because of that added depth, but he's not going to replace the rafters. That would be crazy, right?
Ian, if it were your attic, what would you do?
Similar to what I did in my house, I would do some sort of flash and bat that I would add on to the rafters.
You would add on to the
so
rafters?
that I could. I think I would add a scab onto the underside of the rafters and just keep it at the 3 or 4 inches of closed cell spray foam, and then infill the rest.
So
with
I
that.
totally had it right.
I love this idea, except you guys are missing a chance to do bond fig assemblies because
Yeah.
this is perfect way to use that technique, right? So use
So you would
strips
rip
of
down
rigid
strips of
insulation,
XPS?
and then
Wait.
put 2x on top of that or 1x2s. You know what I mean?
Wait, am my understanding that is in an effort to extend the rafters?
It extends the rafters and creates a thermal break in the
Okay.
rafters, so you don't have continuous lumber, which is, comparatively poor insulator versus, foam insulation, which we're going to cut into strips, and then we're going to put some wood on top of it. We're going to have a deeper cavity, and I think it's going to be fantastic.
So did
Okay.
you win the game show?
I did.
I think you did. Actually,
the poll
Patrick, I've never heard any. I haven't heard you talk in the past about that wall assembly applied to the roof. Have you talked about that before, though?
I think Rob Yeager did this in years past, right? In the early days of the podcast, right?
Yeah, because he converted his attic and his cape.
I think it's a great technique for this. Let's. I mean, we got to keep going with this now. We got question 2. Here we go. The basement is unfinished and uninsulated with 5 feet of the 8-foot height below grade. The slabs appears to be very old, so I'm sure there is no rigid foam insulation under it. I'm considering replacing or pouring over the slab to get a better, flatter floor over which I want to install stone or ceramic tile. The basement stays dry during rainstorms, but is humid during the summer. I want to create a recreation room in the basement, and I don't mind all the idea of leaving the interior rubble foundation walls exposed because I like the look. Also, I was told by one contractor that I should not insulate the rubble foundation walls because the lime mortar in general use at the time of the house's construction depends on a certain degree of moisture to retain its strength. His recommendation was to deal with summer basement humidity by installing a capable humidifier. What would you do if this were your basement? All right, Kylie, I know what you do.
Dehumidify. Yeah, you know what I do, but I don't ever do the right thing. So I have an article that this guy should use or take a look at. It's a Building Science Corps article about rubble foundations, and it specifically states the days of plugging in a dehumidifier in the basement and hanging fiberglass bats from the rim framing are long gone. Unless you're very, very lucky, all rubble foundations leak and are damp. You have to deal with the water. And his solution, this is Joe Stiebrick, is to provide interior drainer and to separate the wood structure from the rubble foundation with a capillary break and then insulate on the inside with spray foam.
It's one of the few times we, go to spray foam, even though we don't like to, right? Because it does all the things we need, which is stick to, a rubble foundation, provide vapor control and insulation. So
You don't want. He doesn't want to leave that exposed if he's going to finish it to be a rec room with kids down there, right?
I don't think so.
I don't think that's a good idea.
So.
It is a good look, but it's.
You could just leave it alone and dehumidify it if it's going to be a basement and let it be a basement, and if you want to use it and level the floor, I was never happier than when I've fixed bad basement concrete floors in the places I've lived or worked on. It's a huge upgrade. Anyone else have thoughts on this?
I think you made a good point that once he was looking at using it as a rec room or living space, then it becomes a game changer in what you can get away with.
I will add that Steve Basic has an article on this topic too. It's called How to Save Old Houses or How to Save an Old House. And he has a different solution. And he installs an interior perimeter drain under the slab. I guess he pours a new slab and installs this drain. And he hangs has hung a drain curtain of 10 mil plastic. He uses Vapor Bright that extends over the rubble walls from the sill plate to the slab. So any water that comes in through the stone foundation hits this barrier and flows down into the perimeter drains, and then he uses a sump pump. That's another way.
Yep. And, I think the point about keeping this uninsulated is definitely the safest approach. If you want to make it living space, though, you really can't do that. Kylie's method that Steve does is great for controlling the moisture in the water that would otherwise be evaporating into your house, right? And loading the dehumidifier, right? You're going to have to deal with that vapor unless you can keep it behind plastic and send it to a drain.
Right, because
Yeah.
Steve's solution doesn't really apply to a finished basement. Am I right to think that?
I think that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
And the important part of it is having that drain tile on the interior that can take that water to a sump pump and be removed from the house. I've seen in instances where they just put the plastic over the wall, but then all it does is allows the water to just go down onto the floor. I've seen that in basements that did not have a concrete floor, that just had gravel or dirt.
Is that effective if that's the floor, not a slab?
Not really, because the water was just coming in contact with that gravel and still getting into the house.
And it's either, accumulating
'Cause it
down
wasn't
there
taking it anywhere.
or it's turning into vapor and, moving through the rest of the house.
Right.
We need some kind of vapor control. All right. Let's round 3. Here we go. I don't know.
Tiebreaker between Patrick and Kylie to win the game show.
The floor joists of my house are set directly into the basement masonry on the perimeter of the house. I have read that building science views on insulating rim joists in these situations has evolved, and insulation is no longer recommended because it can cause too much moisture to build up on the perimeter of the joist, creating rot. I'd appreciate your views on this. Really enjoy the podcast. Thanks, Rob. Well, Rob, you invented a whole new thing for us, so thank you very much for that. So, if these were your joists, what would you do, Ian?
I don't know, I kind of agree with him. Don't stuff anything in there, but I struggle with him wanting to do it as a conditioned living space as to what the best way to go about it is.
Is that a cut and cobble situation? That sounds very intensive.
He makes a good point that you don't want to do anything to trap moisture in there and start rotting those joist ends.
I want to say that this is a piece I've read on GBA, Kylie. Maybe you remember about the research that's been done on these assemblies and what happens when you suddenly prevent the joist from drying. Now, when the wall is insulated, they don't have the same drying and ends tend to rot quickly.
Yeah, I don't remember the piece specifically they're talking about, but I get what you're saying. That makes sense.
I'll try and dig that up so folks can look at that if you're dealing with this. But that is true that the best approach for masonry buildings, which this is, right? This is not a wood frame building. We're talking about a masonry construction with wood floor joists, is to insulate from the outside, but that involves some definite trade-offs aesthetically. And boy, you better be independently wealthy would be my assessment on the cost effectiveness of this.
So Patrick's answer is throw a lot of money at the problem.
Leave it alone. Don't insulate it, let it dry, let it be the way it's been for, 140 years, and don't get too creative. And if you could solve the basement water problems, there's going to be a lot less humidity and the house is going to be more comfortable and more resilient. So I'd say do that. The roof makes a lot of sense. But as with any, energy project, it might make sense to get an auditor in there, do a blower door test, before you start spray foam in the attic. It might not help if it's so leaky, right? It has to be thought of as a entire building envelope.
And start picking the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I think you just won the grand prize.
That's excellent advice. Yes. Low-hanging fruit.
Congratulations.
That's my favorite.
I'm going to get you an I Love Air Sealing t-shirt, I think, is a special prize. All right, this comes from Jim. Hey, guys, love the podcast. Between the information and the humor, I always leave satisfied. My house shakes a lot when the door's closed. The living room wall near the front door is particularly bad. I know the answer is easy. Stop slamming the door. But the point is moot since my overzealous weather stripping and tight door adjustment has trained my preteen kids that the only practical option for closing the door reliably is to slam it. They don't want to hear about my Goldilocks expectations on closing doors any longer. Seriously, though, it is a 1959 ranch with a 2x4 wall and a large window near the door, so it will always be prone to movement. I also know that a previous owner replaced and enlarged the window, and judging by their other work, I would be surprised if the framing is living its best life. I am removing the soffit for another project, and I am wondering if I have an opportunity to stabilize the wall by adding reinforcement from the exterior. If so, how would you approach it? I've concluded that a long metal support beam installed above the soffit will have the highest probability for success. The local metal dealer sells angle iron in 20-foot lengths and square tubing in 24-foot lengths. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think I'm on the right track and would appreciate any insight you can provide on the design details and implementation that will help me focus my effort in the right places. I've included a sketch with dimensions for reference. Jim, this is fantastic. Oh my goodness. Structural steel solutions.
I think he needs a closer on the front door so that his preteens don't have to close it. And it could have a really nice back set to it that'll just suck the door tight. Like a big giant commercial one on the inside of his house. That's what I think he needs.
His kids would insist on that everywhere they live for the rest of their lives if they did that for them, right? They would be like,
Yep.
well, why doesn't the door close automatically by itself? I think the steel is the right solution here because it's thin, right? You got to have something that's not going to interfere with the rest of the structure of the house. And how to do this, I'm not exactly sure. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I think when he has the soffit open, he's just got to have it drilled and bolt it or structural screw it to all the studs and ideally the top plate as well. So if he could get something with a big enough leg to bridge the top plate and then down onto however much of the stud he can reach. I've done similar things with LVLs to stiffen up walls that were shaking like that.
So you let the LVL
Admittedly, only in
into the
barns, but-
studs and top plates? Is that
No, just structural screwed it to the top plate and the tops of the studs.
how do you
to
hide that?
stiffen it. Well, it was a barn, so you didn't have to hide it.
I mean, I think that I love your idea of putting it on the face because I think that's the problem is it's deflecting in and out, right? I thought about putting a flat
Yeah,
piece
he's
of
got
steel
a lot
on
of,
the top
lot of
plate.
holes in that wall.
Yeah, it's going to be a big hole.
What about a
No, he has a
pilaster?
lot of holes in that wall from his sketch that he sent us with the windows and doors and things that are in that wall section.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was wondering about doing a pilaster or a little short return wall
Inside the house.
inside the house. Yeah.
Ooh, oh yeah, that's going to resist that force, right? And some.
Yeah.
So I had a much simpler solution than all of you, and I think it's going to be an aesthetic winner too. Let's build some plywood bookcases and put like a few 100 pounds books against this wall as some mass, and you could hide a structural column if it proved to be useful, or as Jeff suggests, make the wing wall part of that design.
Have you guys ever heard of this issue before? I've never heard anybody talk about this problem.
I'm not going to admit to it, Kylie, because it shows my weakness as a carpenter.
I wonder if there's any issues with either the roof trusses attaching to the top plate.
Yeah, like what's causing
or
it?
the
Right.
rafters or the second floor assembly. Is this wall just standing there with weight on top of it? As if it was all well connected, you wouldn't think that it would shake like that even with that amount of openings.
I don't know. My house shakes. Similarly, same deal, and the front wall is so out of plumb, the door slams itself, right? There's no one slamming it. It's doing it on its own. I don't know. I think some mass is in order. Like my house is just got a lot of windows and that little wall on the eave with roof load and,
That's a really interesting idea, Patrick. I like it.
The bookcase, Kylie.
Yes, like mass. The idea that that could absorb some of that movement. Right?
Yeah,
Am I
I think, and
understanding
then I think
you
you could
right?
hide some structural upgrades
Or
in
is that
it,
the
right?
only
On the
reason?
interior, instead of ripping the entire exterior apart. And but if he's got to go into the soffit anyway, people are going to say that I'm suggesting they put like another 1,000 pounds of weight on this already underframed house. I don't know. Was that helpful at all? Anyone?
Well, we told him he's on the right track,
Yeah.
so that's helpful.
So you're sticking to steel?
I think it's not a bad idea. It seems like it's a practical, easy place for him to start. He's already opening up the soffit. All he has to do is go and buy some structural steel and some anchors and give that a try.
Sounds easy, doesn't it, Kylie?
Yeah.
And I think the idea of making sure that the top plate is secured to the rafters or floor joists or whatever, or ceiling joists is also a good idea.
For many reasons, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some, metal connectors is all you need.
Right.
Some truss tie downs. I would
Yeah,
want
there's a
to
lot
make.
of fastener options for that.
I want to make sure that the whoever put the windows in didn't like cut some structural elements, which would be what I worry, because sometimes people just take out jack studs or they do all kinds of weird stuff to make
could that
windows
lead
fit
to
in
this-
openings that are too small. What's that,
Could
Kylie?
could that add to the vibration issue? That cutting out of studs?
I would think so.
Yeah, it seems
Certainly
like
could.
it would.
Yeah.
I can picture that.
Well, Jim, I don't know if that was at all helpful, but please keep us posted
We
on
tried.
what goes on. Take some pictures to show us what's up there, because I'm dying to know what this person did, or if it's just, nothing that can be done about it. This comes from Mike. Hey, podcast. I'm building an unvented roof in Climate Zone 5 on a retrofit/existing roof. The shingles were stripped off, which left holes in the sheathing. I didn't have anything to seal the holes, and I went ahead and had the roofer tape the sheathing seams and install Mento 3000 membrane. Question: is it worth it to air seal the holes from the inside? The Scissor truss ceiling/attic is currently all open, so relatively easy access. All of the fluffy insulation will be in the rafter bays. Since the old roof is 1.5 inches lower than my new roof addition, on the old roof, I will have 5.5 inches of polyiso, which should keep the sheathing warm. Okay, do we need to seal the holes?
No.
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 Although
Jeff, you
I-
disagree? Anyone?
No.
No, full consensus on this, because you have an air barrier, right? We got the Mento, the polyiso.
I will share a tip that this is a GBA question, and I'll share something that a regular reader, he weighs in a lot, and he's well respected. He said, you'll be installing the Rigid Plus a new deck over the existing roof and fastening it down with a bunch of big screws. This should do a pretty good job of clamping the Mento down against the roof deck. I can't see those holes leaking much air. As an extra precaution, you could also tape the seams of the Mento. If you have some extra time, you can also pick up a pail of duct seal mastic and brush the holes on the inside for peace of mind, but he doesn't think it's necessary.
I think it's crazy. You know how many freaking holes are going to be
Yeah.
there to fill? Oh my goodness, it's nuts. Second question, with the attic being conditioned, how important is it to air seal at the vaulted ceiling? I plan to reinstall a drywall ceiling vaulted, and it will have some recessed lights in the kitchen. I will have an air handler / ductwork up there too. Maybe it would be best to go with open cell in the rafter bays. I believe open cell acts as an air barrier. Well, we don't like recessed lights in the ceiling at all of insulated assemblies, Mike.
Unless you're going to go to the extent of building some kind of insulated box that goes over the top of the can lights, but you're better off with wafers or one of the many other options that there are now that mimic the look of cans.
I don't know what wafers are, Ian. What are they?
They look sort of like a waffle, and they have fins on them. So all you have to do is cut an opening in the drywall, and then it clips
Okay.
to the drywall. And they're
Before we
usually
get
LED and
into
give off much less heat.
Before we get into the discussion of the air handler out there, we have to remind folks that stay tuned for the podcast after show. Kylie, do you want to give an update on what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, we thought we would talk about the importance of residential energy retrofits in the near future for a variety of reasons.
And it seems great timing because a number of our questions have been dealing with these subject lately. So,
And we're about to launch a podcast with Ryan Shanahan of Bird's Mouth Build and Design. He'll be the host. This will be hopefully a GBA sponsored thing, and that's the whole subject: energy retrofits.
wow, that's awesome. So when does that
Yeah.
start, Kylie?
Hopefully as soon as possible. You know, these things, they take a little time to launch, but he's gung-ho. He's got tons of ideas, tons of guests, and really exciting stuff, because this is an area that people are starting to think about, yourself included, right, Patrick?
Totally, Kylie. I'm in the beginning throes of sizing a heating plant for my home because my oil-fired hot air furnace is very old and not all that safe. So it needs to go. And I'm debating like how far do I push the deep retrofit solution in my house, which is not terribly energy efficient, but it's so small. And, honestly, the embodied carbon of like deep energy retrofits has me thinking a lot lately. So I think it's a topic for great interest for so many folks, even folks outside the, building sector. This is going to be part of their life choices.
Yeah. And we talk often about new construction because it's easier to get everything right when you're talking about retrofits because it's so case dependent. But, you can try to hit some bigger points.
Potential for improvement on existing housing stock. I mean, if a house is code built now, it doesn't need a deep energy retrofit. But there are some really leaky old houses that could benefit from, weatherization and deep energy retrofit measures. So I think it's a great topic for a podcast. You guys are probably surprised to hear me say that.
Not at all.
You're just happy that you don't have to host it.
So am I.
Okay, so why do we need to put the air handler up there and the ductwork? I mean, with the attic being conditioned, how important is it to air seal the vaulted ceiling? So if you have the air barrier above the heating, and if you have the thermal and air barrier above the heating and cooling equipment, that's one thing, but we don't want to put that up there if it's not. And so if it's not, you need to make the ceiling or whatever below it is the air barrier, but that is really a poorer assembly because the heating equipment and the cooling equipment and the ductwork end up in an unconditioned space,
Outside,
which
right.
is not what you want when you're making 100+ degree air and blowing it into the house, or 65 degree air and blowing it into the house when the attic is 80 or 100 or 0.
I was going to say, or the same temp as it is outside in January.
Right.
Thank you. Do we think he's putting this heating and cooling equipment in a conditioned space, though, right? That's what we are to believe.
That's my impression. Yeah.
That's the way it sounds that he's describing it. I would question his
Open
wanting
cell.
to use open cell instead of closed cell. I think this is another flash and bat opportunity.
By the
So
way,
you flash with closed cell foam and then put up netting and then blow in cellulose or fiberglass. Is that your desired assembly, Ian?
I think that would be an easy way to go about it. But if the writer wanted to do some of the work himself, I wouldn't see why you couldn't use any kind of bats that you could get your hands on.
Have you had to staple up bats in a scissor truss situation? It seems like it would suck. It would seem like
It
cutting
does.
in. Yeah, I think that, and it would be hard, right?
Yeah, that's what's underneath my closed cell spray foam is stapled up craft bats that I put up. It's an endeavor. Took
How
an
long did that
eternity, or
take
at
you?
least it felt like. I think it took almost a week of just stapling stuff up and stuffing things in the webbing of the trusses and making sure that where my disc lights were in the ceiling, that I had the boxes properly air sealed and taped up behind. It takes a lot of time, especially when you're up off the ground.
And it's not enjoyable work, I'm sure, right? Maybe you get to listen
No,
to
it's
some music
miserable.
or podcast, but it's grueling, I'm sure.
It's misery inducing work.
And you were probably doing that when it was like 90% humidity out.
I think it was in June or July, if I remember right.
Kylie, any final thoughts on the show today, or any of our questions or
Just
feedback?
I'm just sort of looping back to something I said earlier and wondering about it. It was to do with extending rafters or deepening the cavity there in an attic. I suggested I-joist, or I mentioned I-joist as something that high performance builders use, and I think really what I meant to say was LVLs. Am I right?
I think they're both part of roof framing in certain instances. I think I-joists would be more common because they're considerably less expensive and lighter.
Okay.
And oftentimes you don't need the loading that LVLs have, right? But sometimes they're, hip rafters or structural ridges, or I remember a story in JLC where someone scribed like these swoopy rafters onto LVLs to make the curves in them. So, I mean, there are situations where you would, but it would not be common, I would say.
Okay.
There's a lot of good engineering details that your I-joist manufacturer provides for how to use their product as a roof rafter. It's a well thought out system.
And it makes a super flat roof and cathedral ceiling, which is something I've observed. It seems to make them flatter than any other framing material out there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this was a great show. So stay tuned, everybody, for the podcast after show. You can be listen to that by being a Fine Homebuilding All Access member, where you get to have the archives, the detailed drawings, videos, all the stuff that Fine Homebuilding has made throughout the years. So stay tuned for that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to Ian, Kylie, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Do some air sealing, will you?